welcome to meeting number 16 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. The webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Pursuant to Standing Order 108 Sub 2 and the motion adopted by the committee on Friday, October 9th, 2020, the committee will be resuming its study of urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing. I would like to start by welcoming Ms. Dancho and Mr. Tucker as permanent members of the committee. I trust that you have either been vigorously campaigning or that you have been lobbied extensively because of the upcoming election of the vice chair, which will be part of committee business today. I would also like to welcome our witnesses to begin our discussion with 5 minutes of opening remarks, followed by questions from the Office of the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Yves Giroux, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Mark Mahabir, Director of Policy and General Counsel, Carol Nickel, Analyst, Ben Siegel-Brown, Analyst. We're going to begin with Mr. Giroux for 5 minutes, please. So welcome to the committee. We look forward to your presentation. You have the floor.
Thank you. Bonjour, Monsieur le Président et les membres du comité. Je vous remercie beaucoup de nous.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. I'd like to thank you very much for the invitation to appear before you today, because this is our first official appearance before the committee. We are pleased to be here today to present the findings of our report, which is entitled Urban, Rural, and Northern Indigenous Housing, which we were honored to prepare at the request of this committee. With me today, I have Mark Mahabir, who is Director of Policy, Costing, and also General Counsel, as well as Caroline Nicole and Ben Siegel-Brown, lead analysts on the report. The Parliamentary Budget Officer supports Parliament by providing independent and non-partisan economic and financial analysis to parliamentarians. As the legislation states, we provide the analysis for the purposes of raising the quality of parliamentary debate and promoting greater budget transparency and accountability.
In English. Consistent with the PBO's legislated mandate, at the request of this committee, my office prepared an independent analysis of the federal government's spending to address Indigenous housing needs in urban, rural, and northern areas. This report examines Indigenous housing in all areas of Canada except for unreserved. Canada has 677,000 Indigenous households living in urban, rural, or northern areas. Of those households, 124,000, or 18%, are in housing need. Based on our analysis, there's a $636 million gap on an annual basis between what these households pay for shelter and the level deemed affordable by the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. The federal government has explicitly allocated $179 million per year to address Indigenous housing and homelessness programs in urban, rural, and northern areas over the 10-year term of Canada's National Housing Strategy. We also considered federal transfers to provinces and territories for housing and homelessness programs. Federal transfers also contribute to the capacity of provinces and territories to provide housing support to Indigenous households. These categories of support, when combined, amount to $838 million in federal support for Indigenous housing and homelessness. Despite these amounts, a gap remains. We'd be pleased to respond to any questions you may have regarding our analysis or any other PBO work.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giroux. We're going to begin with rounds of questions, starting with the Conservatives. Mr. Viss for 6 minutes. Mr. Viss, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Giroux, for appearing before us today. Based on your analysis, there is a $636 million annual gap between what Indigenous Canadians in housing need pay for shelter and the level deemed affordable by CMHC. It was made clear during our last meeting that CMHC is not collecting data on rural and remote homelessness. If appropriate data were collected, do you feel the problem would be more acute and the monetary shortfall even greater? And do you feel these are known unknowns or unknown unknowns?
It's difficult to determine whether the gap would be bigger if we had better data. One can assume it probably would be bigger, but it's very difficult to say that with a high level of certainty. So it's not known for sure, but my bet would be that it's probably higher. As to whether it's in the unknown unknowns or the known unknowns, I think that probably falls into the known unknowns because we know there's a problem in that area. We just don't know exactly how big of an issue it is. So it's for that reason, it's not in the unknown unknowns, to paraphrase Donald Rumsfeld.
Thank you, sir. Your report states that for many Indigenous families, affordable housing is unavailable in their community given their household income. You also make the point that many Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation programs are not designed to support low-income families who are not able to afford market rents and therefore rely on social housing. How could your analysis help inform the appropriate mix of housing interventions, i.e. like rent subsidies, rent supplements, social housing, and even home ownership that the government should be undertaking? Secondly, how could your analysis help inform how funds are distributed or administered through a separate urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy? And thirdly, did your analysis find if the government spending all the funds they've allocated to Indigenous housing, or are they returning surpluses to general revenue in any certain years?
For the third question, I'll probably defer to Caroline or Ben, but let me address your first question. So the mix of programs, it's various programs. So there's a lot of information in the report, and various programs have various pros and cons, flexibility, targeting, admin costs. So it's a mix of programs, and really it's a policy decision as to which are more efficient. It depends on the objective of each intervention. How the funds are distributed also depends on the programs. There are some programs for which there's direct federal government intervention. For example, some homelessness programs, some CMHC programs. For others, it's agreements with provinces, and it's often the case when it comes to subsidized housing. And provinces also have their own programs when it comes to all these various areas of intervention. So it's really a mixed bag. And that's one of the thing that I found looking at the results of the work of Caroline, Ben, and Mark, that there is a very wide range of programs in this area. So Caroline or Ben on the spending all the funds or not?
It's possible to say that less has been spent than was allocated to some years. For example, under the rural and native housing, there was approximately 12 million allocated for the last few years, and they spent about 8 million. But in that case, the fundings that were distributed reflected the operating shortfall of the particular housing providers. So it was linked with the degree of need, and these aren't programs that create new housing. So for the other programs, it's more difficult to say because there's an allocation for the 10 years, and in many cases, we're still at the very start of that, particularly the Canada Community Housing Initiative, which has $200 million, of which we've only spent less than about 100,000. So,
and when was this program started?
That was started in 2017, but the funding phases in over the 10 years of the National Housing Strategy.
Thank you. Chair, do I have any time left?
Yes, you do. You have about a minute and a half, Mr. Viss.
Okay. Over the course of this study, several witnesses talked about the problems with CMHC proposal-based funding programs. Proposal-based funding creates excessive administrative burden for community-based housing providers. Moreover, communities with the greatest need may not have the capacity to access funding through this type of process. Does your analysis support this views? Please explain why or why not. And how could your analysis help CMHC to better ensure that its programs not only address the needs of Indigenous families, but also provide good value for money?
Well, the analysis indicates that there are different administrative costs, different according to different programs. So in that sense, the analysis could be very useful for CMHC and also for other government departments involved in supporting housing and homelessness programs. They could look at how the admin costs vary, and we all know that admin costs are funds disbursed that don't go to the intended recipients. So the government could could aim to limit the admin costs so that more of the money goes directly to those in need of housing assistance or funds to address homelessness. So in that sense, there is a wealth of information in the report that could truly help CMHC and federal government departments better target their programs and reduce their admin costs. And there's lots of information in the report, but there's also lots of information that we also have in the office that did not get published because it's too detailed, and we wanted you to have useful information, but we didn't want to overload the committee with too much information.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you
Viss.
both. That was very helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Giroux. Next, we're going to go to Ms. Young, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. Giroux for being here today and for the report. As you say, it's a wealth of information, and went over it over the last couple of days and was really struck by the fact that the provinces appear not to be using federal transfer payments on Indigenous social housing. Is that a fair assessment as you see it?
Well, I would say it's difficult to make that blanket statement because provinces and territories receive program funding from CMHC. They also receive general transfer payments, for example, equalization or Canada social transfer. So money is fungible, and it's not always clear exactly how much is coming from exactly which program that eventually gets spent. So, but there is some level of spending from the federal government that is a bit difficult to trace back to specific housing programs indeed. But as I said, money is fungible, so it could be money from other federal sources that ends up in these programs.
I guess the fact of the matter is that there are so many different programs. That in itself is one of the problems here. Do you think that, as some of our witnesses actually suggested, that they need an Indigenous CMHC, and that would be the answer to many of the problems that are faced with Indigenous housing? Do you think that would be the way to go for the federal government?
That's probably a good idea, an idea at least worth considering very seriously, because right now there are several departments involved in programs to support affordable housing and combat homelessness, including CERNA, so the Crown Indigenous Relations Department. So if there was, if the funding for Aboriginal or Indigenous people was to be funneled through one department, I think that would probably help focus the minds when it comes to that clientele that has very specific needs, as demonstrated in our report. So that's certainly an idea worth considering.
Now, on page 28 of your report, it talks about the total number of units targeted to Indigenous people is not tracked by the provinces. And this speaks to an earlier question about data. How does your experience analyzing all of this government data support other witnesses who told us that there was a need for Indigenous-led data strategy by the government?
Well, the report was based on data that was provided by government departments. And in the course of drafting the report, we found that getting accurate, high quality data proved to be a challenge. And I'm not saying that here that departments were unwilling to provide data, quite the opposite. They were happy and they were, well, happy. They were collaborative in providing data, but the quality of the data itself was not what we would have expected. And just one quick example, we got updated data the week that we published a report, which was a bit late when you have a report of that magnitude to get revised data a couple of days before you go to publication, taking into account that you have to publish but also to translate a report. So data quality is an issue, and what you're suggesting could probably help solve, at least in part, that problem.
Would data also help in the area of discrimination based upon race and family status when it comes to Indigenous peoples?
That's a very delicate question. I'm not sure that data in and of itself would be a sufficient condition to address that issue, but it would certainly be a first step. Having better data would probably allow to better quantify the issue of discrimination. If it is present, first and foremost, my bet is probably present, and then to what extent, and then allowing governments to take better action against that.
Do I have time for one more question?
Did you do?
Okay. The Ontario Auditor General report suggests that the province hasn't been effective in negotiating guaranteed rents at or below market value for units. Is that one of the problems here, is that especially it is different in each province, and that so Indigenous peoples are treated quite differently depending on where is their home?
That certainly could be one of the issues because of the very different quilt of programs, so a patchwork rather of programs that exists across the country depending on where you live and which jurisdiction you depend on for affordable housing. It makes things much more complicated. So anybody who reads this report hoping to find one conclusion will be sorely disappointed for that very reason, because there are wide differences across the country in terms of affordability of housing and also accessibility of housing programs, because the needs vary across the country, but the support available also vary across the country. So it makes it very complicated to come up with one easy picture of the solution and also one easy fix to the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Giroux and Ms. Young. Maintenant, c'est le tour de Madame Chabot. À vous la parole.
Madame Chabot, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Giroux, Director, and your team, I'd like to thank all of you for your analysis and your report. It's very enlightening, given the time that you were given to prepare the report. I think it's going to be of considerable aid to us in the report that we have to make. As you yourself said, you're here to enlighten us so that we can make the best decision possible as parliamentarians. You said, and your analysis testifies to this fact, that there's these hundreds of thousands of people who are in housing need, and the gap of $636 million. I think you were also saying in your analysis that Indigenous households are 1.5 times more likely to be in housing need as compared to non-Indigenous households. So based on your analysis, are you able to assess the increase in needs or change in needs versus investments? Have you drawn any conclusions regarding these two variables? In other words, can we get there? We didn't specifically look at changes over time in programs. That would be a question that would have required historical data that's more complete than what we had. However, the Indigenous population has a much higher demographic growth rate than the rest of the population. We're not talking about slightly higher demographic growth, we're talking about considerably higher. Funding to maintain the status quo would have to increase much more quickly than simply to reflect the general Canadian population's growth and inflation levels. So if there is no significant investment targeted specifically to Indigenous Canadians, obviously the problem is not going to become smaller and smaller because we're dealing with a rapidly growing population. We see that Indigenous housing needs are increasingly urgent as households grow. Households with several children have more urgent needs for housing, for appropriate and affordable housing, more than the rest of the population. The differences are less noteworthy for two-person households, but when we're talking about 6 and 7-person households, the needs are more urgent, which indicates that population growth means that these needs are not going to become smaller and smaller, but quite on the contrary. Regarding the last point you've raised, when you talk about housing needs for families with higher numbers of members in them, according to the analysis that you conducted, well, you also talked about the market playing a role in the housing deficits. We know that, I think you understand my question anyhow. Well, yes, clearly market prices play a key role. In certain cities, markets make it very difficult to be able to find affordable housing. But it's also the concentration of people who are Indigenous. In certain cities, you see that Winnipeg and Vancouver are two cities in which the prevalence of Indigenous people in housing need, in need of affordable and appropriate housing is greatest. Winnipeg, not necessarily because of the high cost of housing, but rather because of the population size. But in Vancouver, it's clearly because of the very high cost of housing. On the other end of the spectrum, in some areas, the cost of housing is traditionally lower and needs are a little less urgent, or the proportion of Indigenous people dealing with inappropriate or unaffordable housing is different. So clearly market prices have a significant impact on affordability, but also on the ability to find adequate housing. Last question, probably. We received additional data today reflecting facts that we've heard. In other words, specifically for young people, we're talking about 24%, and lone parent families and single people. The statistics are quite significant. I'm not sure if we can distinguish between whether they're urban, rural, or northern, because they're in the study, but there's the whole issue of homelessness as well, especially when we're talking about young people, which account for 24%, and in urban settings, we know that there's a high component of homelessness. With the data that you had, how can we improve the data to better illustrate and monitor this impact, especially among youth, when I'm talking about homelessness? I'm going to ask Caroline, Mark, or Ben if they have any suggestions to improve the data. Well, perhaps I could intervene quickly. In terms of data, I would say that our main source of information is the 2016 census. So one possible improvement would be to have more recent data. So the next census or in any other source of data that would be more recent, because the real estate market is a market that changes quickly. As Yves was saying, there's also the demographic component. And on a longitudinal basis, that has a big influence as well. In terms of details with respect to data, the thing I would say is it also refers to the census. It would be useful to have a more specific regional aspect, which would enable us to have a better picture, especially when we're talking about territories which are rural. A census or other sources of data available, because of confidentiality, they're fairly limited in scope. I think this applies to youth and the elderly as well. But in terms of age, the picture that we have in terms of age is relatively good compared to other aspects because the data is fairly substantial. Thank you, Madame Nicolas and Madame Chabot. Next, Ms. Kazam.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd just like to welcome you today to our committee. I really appreciate having you here today. You mentioned Winnipeg. I represent the riding in Winnipeg where we're dealing with a pretty severe housing crisis. We've only had 143 units built since 2017, and we unfortunately lost another life today at one of the encampments who died in a fire in a makeshift shelter. Your PBO report mentions that Winnipeg is currently in the highest housing need, core housing need for Indigenous peoples, Vancouver being second. As the report indicates, there are 9,000 households in core housing need alone, 8,000 in Vancouver. I'm wondering how much would be needed, and you also spoke about a $635 million gap. I'm wondering what portion of that gap is specific to Winnipeg and what portion of that gap is specific to Vancouver.
So I don't have that information off the top of my head, that the quantified affordability gap for each of these two cities. If Ben, Mark, or Caroline know off the top of their head, they can waive, or if not, we can try to provide that in writing to you after the meeting.
I'd appreciate that very much. There's a severe lack of affordable housing in the country. Clearly, we know targeted more towards Indigenous peoples. And it is a crisis. I've had many discussions with my colleague Adam Vaughn, certainly about the dire situation we are in Winnipeg with, for example, trench fever that popped up in December. We know that rental rates are rapidly increasing, and we know that wages are staying stagnant. Unemployment is certainly growing. Would it be safe to say that without a concerted effort to control rental rates and build and maintain affordable, accessible housing unit, that we will see this $635 million gap continue to increase?
Well, I'm not sure about rental rate. That's or rent control. Sorry, that's a decision that would have to be made by governments, and I won't pronounce on that. Other jurisdictions have done that in the past with some different results. So one thing is for sure that without additional investments with a growing population, Aboriginal and Indigenous population, it's clear that needs for affordable and adequate housing will probably keep on growing. And unless Aboriginal and Indigenous Canadians are plentiful in finding high-paying jobs at a much faster rate than the rest of the population, or if rental rates go down all of a sudden, which would be very surprising. So in all likelihood, this issue without additional investments by governments at all levels is very likely to go on increasing.
Would you agree that as a result of the pandemic, the housing crisis has exacerbated even further?
I'm not sure. We could base that on anecdotes. I know people who are looking for housing at reasonable rates that are finding it very, very difficult right now, and but that's based on anecdotes. So it seems to be the case for sure, based on people we know, because housing came to a standstill in the spring of 2020, which seems to have backed down the construction of affordable units. But whether that will be just a blip or whether that's something that will be durable remains to be seen. And not being an expert in the real estate market, I can only base on that on the few anecdotes I saw. So you're probably much better placed than me to say that with the context you have in your writings.
So just one last question. So today I wrote a letter along with all elected officials from my riding in the downtown area, calling on the government for immediate investment to really address this dire crisis. Like I said, we lost another life today. We had somebody freeze to death in a bus shelter about 2 weeks ago. We had a woman who is preferring to live in a bus shelter than go into shelter because the conditions and the safety issues for women are quite intense in shelters. Calling on the government to immediately invest. The government gave our specific riding 12.5. We're saying clearly that is not enough. Do you believe that the 12.5 million that was granted in the Rapid Housing Initiative is adequate considering the level of crises we're currently facing in Winnipeg?
I can't really comment on that because that would venture into policy world, but I think your question is very valid. However, rapid housing is in early stages, as I understand it, but as I said before, there's many programs, so looking at one program in isolation doesn't give the full picture.
So how much more would
Gazan.
you? Oh, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Giroux. Yeah, you'll get another chance. Ms. Falk, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I want to thank the witnesses as well for being here and the work that they not have only done here, but that they continue to do for us across the board. During this study, we have heard from many, if not most witnesses, that the administrative burden of existing housing programs can be a significant barrier to accessing them. So this can be particularly challenging for smaller organizations that don't necessarily have the resources to take on the workload of tackling that burden. And we do know bureaucratic red tape is an added cost for the delivery of a program. And your report has identified some of the administrative costs incurred by existing housing programs. So I have noted some significant numbers in your report, including that about 10% of ESDC's total expenses for assisted housing programs are for operating expenses, and that community organizations through the Reaching Home program can use up to 15% of the funds they receive for their own administrative costs. When it comes to CMHC's Rental Construction Financing Initiative, the RCFI, and National Housing Co-Investment Fund, the report breaks it down a bit further and estimates that an average administrative cost per single application exceeds $300,000. So I'm just wondering if you could give us some more insight as to how that per application cost was assessed, what specific administrative costs were included in that average, and who incurred those administrative costs. Was it CMHC and the applicant?
So thank you. I'll ask Ben, Mark, or Caroline to step in as to what was included in the admin cost in order to give you a more fulsome response if they have the details. But from the outset, I'll say it's data that was provided by government departments. So I don't know the level of details that they provided. Ben?
With respect to the administrative cost for the financing for housing programs, that's the Rental Construction Financing Initiative and the National Housing Co-Investment Fund, which I estimated to be over $300,000 per application. That's not a very precise figure because CMHC was not able to provide a breakdown of its administrative costs by function within financing for housing. It's just those two programs account for the vast majority of budgetary expenditures. So I assume that the administrative costs are attributable to them. And then they also weren't able to provide administrative costs for prior years. So I had to assume that the administrative costs of $36 million in 2019 were typical of 2018 to 2020. And then I took that total administrative cost and divided it by the total number of applications that had been approved, including those that had received conditional approval, because I assumed that some of those administrative costs are incurred upfront. So it's dividing it over a larger number of applications than is shown elsewhere in the report. So that's how I estimated the administrative cost per application. It's more to flag it as something that should be considered in the designing of programs like the National Housing Co-Investment Fund to monitor the administrative burden and determine whether it's necessary.
For sure, thank you. Well, to me, that seems like a lot of administration costs when we're talking in the millions. I don't know if you can comment on this, but are there similarities to draw between the average application costs for those programs and other existing housing programs?
I'm not sure on other housing programs, but admin costs ranging at about 10% are not uncommon. I would say, unfortunately, especially for programs that disperse millions of dollars to one recipient. So it's not atypical to have admin costs about 10% of total program costs. For housing programs, it depends on the nature of each program. So for example, programs that are capital transfers, it's a one-off, so it tends to be less administrative burdensome, if I'm correct, then rather than ongoing transfer payments for which there seems to be a need for ongoing monitoring of expenditures.
Thank you, Ms. Falk.
Perfect,
Mr.
thank
Giroux. Next, Mr. Vaughn, please, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, I think that
Thanks
was
very much. I think I'll step away from the anecdotal evidence and the guessing and the extrapolations and just try to deal with the facts. I'm a former journalist, and in my newsroom, they told you if your mother says she loves you, you still need a second source. So I'll try and stick to the facts here. On page 4, you make the statement that Finance Canada's major transfer of the provinces contribute to the pool of resources available for housing. It's not possible to determine the extent to which these transfers affect provincial spending on Indigenous housing. You don't know what the provinces spend with federal dollars on Indigenous housing. That's what that statement, I assume, means.
It means we can't follow specific dollars from equalization,
you don't have facts,
for example.
Right.
Well, we don't have a pure connection.
Right. And then on page 25, where you say within CMHC, most of the funding to address housing affordability is dispersed to the provinces, it means the bulk of the spending we're doing, you have no line of sight as to whether it's being spent on Indigenous housing through the provinces. In other words, when we transfer money to the province without strings and criteria and reporting mechanisms, we actually don't know what they're spending it on.
We don't know for sure. That's right. We can't attach $1 of federal expenditures to that specific Aboriginal housing. So that's why we had to make assumptions as to the proportion. So if a province spends half of its own funding, we would assume that half of the federal dollars would go there. But it's quite possible that federal dollars,
which is interesting because in the same report you talk about, on average, the average province spends about 25% of its funding on Indigenous housing, Manitoba being the lowest, which is a surprising historic low across all provinces. It has the lowest expenditure on subsidized housing for Indigenous people. But what I find also interesting about that is that you claim that 53% of Indigenous people are in subsidized housing, but you don't know who's subsidizing it.
Well, it's subsidized
by somebody.
Yes, and it could be a mix of funding that comes from the feds, from the province, or the municipality in some instances. So it's
and yet
not
in the areas where you do have clear federal jurisdiction on the Rapid Housing Initiative, you've identified that only 127 new units are targeted. I was very heavily involved in the design of Rapid Housing Initiative. Can you tell me where you got the target of 127 new units under Rapid Housing, where that figure 127 comes from? Because my understanding is there is no hard target set there. It's prioritized but not targeted.
It's data that we got from CMHC.
So that's data from CMHC as to what they targeted or what they've achieved so far halfway through a program?
I think it's what they've achieved, but I'll turn to.
Okay.
Well, I don't know all the details of every single program.
No, it's clear. It's clear.
It's financial commitments to date. It's not the target for the program. There is no explicit allocation within the Rapid Housing Strategy for Indigenous housing.
So that's 127 out of how many?
Give me a second.
We can get back to you with the.
CMHC did not provide that data to us.
They just told you 127 units and you put it down.
No, they gave us a list of all of the projects and all the corresponding data, but only for projects which committed to creating Indigenous units.
Okay.
So we don't
and
have
then back to the Canada Housing Benefit, you say that only about 21% of the dollars have been spent. That's entirely under the jurisdiction of the provinces, right? They're sitting on 80% of the money that's been given to them. They're sitting on the unspent dollars. That's what that figure indicates. We've transferred it. They haven't spent it. BC, for example, has just announced that they'll be rolling the Canada Housing Benefit out, despite the fact they were transferred the dollars last year.
Yes, so our report shows that that in 2019, which was the first data for which we have a reporting, there were no Indigenous households that received assistance from the Canada Housing Benefit.
Did you get a racialized breakdown on all groups that received the Canada Housing Benefit?
It's part of the required reporting under their bilateral agreements that they identified the number of Indigenous households that received Canada Housing benefits, and
so
none of them indicated that they had served any.
Unless the federal government makes it explicit that it be spent on Indigenous household, we don't have jurisdiction there if the provinces refuse.
Yes, we would have no cause to complain if they did not spend. It would not be a breach of the bilateral agreement for them not to spend that money on Indigenous housing units.
So if we want to intentionally spend on Indigenous housing, we have to do it federally.
Okay. Thank you. Madame Chabot, 2 minutes et demi. Madame Chabot, on ne peut pas vous en...
We don't hear you? Yes, sorry. I had promised that it would never happen again. One should never say never in life. So in the amounts transferred to the provinces for provincial housing assistance and homelessness, in your analysis, can you give us an idea of how these federal transfer payments have evolved over the years, in recent years? Because, well, that's a comment. Because contrary to other colleagues, I think that when it comes to the provinces, there is money expected and it's used judiciously. So do you have those changes of transfers in recent years? I'd ask Carolyn and Ben if we have the historical changes, and if we do, if we could send it to you. Thank you very much.
Their Rapid Housing Initiative, from which started in 2014, and there was an increase in spending from the not the Rapid Housing Initiative, the Homelessness Partnering Strategy. We have data for the prior Homelessness Partnering Strategy, and we could provide the spending over the past years over that. There was an increase in spending from the Homelessness Partnering Strategy to the current Reaching Home Strategy.
Oui, autre question dans votre étude.
Another question. In your study, you focused on the high proportion of Indigenous homes which are overcrowded. And Mr. Giroux, you referred to this as well. In your analysis, what would the challenges be that this raises to programs for housing construction that would be adapted? Well, it's a particular challenge to have more bedrooms in the homes, more than the markets or developers are used to providing usually for the general population. Because generally people think about a typical family that has 2 or maybe 3 children. But if you're dealing with Indigenous clientele and you're building with Indigenous clientele in mind, you have to plan for more housing with more bedrooms and bigger spaces. So you have to think of an average household size that's a little bit bigger than what you would normally have in mind with people who are non-Indigenous. So that's a special challenge that has to be thought about. Obviously, I'm not in the housing building business, but it's one of the special challenges related to the fact that the size of households is bigger for Indigenous households. Thank you, Ms. Chabot. Next, Ms. Gazan.
1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a jurisdictional question. I know that my colleague Adam Vaughan was speaking about provinces and the feds. So in Manitoba, we often missed out on a lot of the funding opportunities due to the cost matching requirements, something that our current Palliser government doesn't want to do. And this has negatively impacted Winnipeg, for example, to be able to secure adequate housing investments, even when we are experiencing severe issues like trench fever, diseases of poverty, and losses to life in our community, which is becoming a regular occurrence in my riding. How can this be changed to ensure that cities in dire need of housing dollars are not disqualified from funding when provinces aren't willing to participate in cost matching programs?
So that's an interesting question, and I would probably make the parallel with infrastructure programs. So when the federal government partners with provinces and territories for cost matching when it comes to building infrastructure, some jurisdictions don't have the same means or the same policy priorities, and in these cases, direct federal investment, going it alone, is usually the best way to ensure that some pieces of infrastructure get built that is not requiring cost matching and having federal programs that don't need or require cost matching by provinces. But it also means that the federal spending does not leverage provincial funding as well. But it's an effective way of ensuring that some needs are met despite what provinces would want or not want to do.
Yeah, I appreciate that because, I mean, it's clearly not working in Manitoba, and I feel like the provincial government is becoming the greatest excuse in the world for everybody not to help people dying on the streets. But just going back to a question that I had before about the $12.5 million, clearly not adequate, didn't work, in terms of where the funding, people were qualified to get the funding. How much more would be needed? Like, what would be a reasonable ballpark considering the dire situation that we're in Winnipeg with the greatest housing need?
So that's an interesting question. I don't have the numbers for Winnipeg per se, but we made an attempt at answering that question on page 38 of the English version. So, for example, the cost to address 25% of the affordability gap for 100% of Indigenous households in housing need, and another table, the cost to provide, for example, X% of Indigenous households in housing need, blah, 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 with a typical Indigenous housing unit. So we tried to give an order of magnitude for the country as a whole, but I don't have the data for Winnipeg or Manitoba.
Thank you,
Okay,
Mr.
thank you very
Giroux.
much.
Thank you, Ms. Kazan. Next, Mr. Viss, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Amazing discussion all around. Just a point of clarification, Mr. Giroux, on the 600 and change a shortfall that you reference in your report. Would that include an improved administrative capacity, or did that analysis include the status quo and not account for any of the project improvements that we discussed in earlier questions?
Ben and Caroline can probably answer that question with a higher level of certainty than me. Ben?
The $636 million cost reflects the gap between what Indigenous households are currently paying and either the affordable level or the cost of market housing if the housing isn't adequate. We believe that that would be the cost to close that gap, excluding administrative costs, under a efficient program design.
Okay, so it does account for program improvements. Just another point of clarification. How much money has CMHC since 2015 put into Canada's General Revenue Fund?
It's probably billions of dollars, but I'll have to get back to you on that specific answer because it varies year by year, depends on retained earnings or not, and the dividend it pays or doesn't pay to the government in any given year.
And how much money since 2015 has the government spent on all of their programs, and secondly, on Indigenous programs?
So to give you a total since 2015, we'll probably have to get back to you with a precise number as well.
That would be very helpful, because I just found it odd, given how much we know Indigenous people don't have adequate housing, that CMHC paid dividends to the federal government.
I guess I would clarify that they're separate business lines, so the dividends don't arise from the assisted housing programs. The assisted housing programs are funded by appropriations from the Government of Canada, so they're not using the profits from their mortgage insurance business to cover the cost of assisted housing programs.
Thank you. I have no further questions. If Rosemary would like any time, I'm good to go.
I'm good, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to close then with Mr. Turnbull for 5 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Turnbull.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks to Mr. Giroux and his team for being here today. Appreciate the report and all the work that you put into it. I understand that the report, sort of the objective of it is to identify what programs are in place, what expenditure is currently in place, what the housing needs are, identify the sort of gap, and then talk a little bit or project a little bit about what the cost to address that or close that gap would be. Would you say that's correct? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a very accurate depiction of what we attempted to do and provide you that type of information.
Great. So maybe I can just ask a few clarifications around that. So you said in your opening remarks, Mr. Giroux, that 124,000 individuals, Indigenous people, were in housing need. How does that break down into those that may be homeless, those that may be living in inadequate and unsustainable or unsuitable housing, or those perhaps living in supportive housing, or those living in housing that require some level of subsidy?
Caroline and Ben can probably provide you with a more accurate breakdown.
Yeah, no problem. So I'll refer maybe to the matrix on page 14. So just to clarify, the 124, we're talking about households. So the people count would be much greater. To start, of those 124 people, we have 31,000. We estimate that 31,000 are in subsidized housing. Here, subsidized housing it's according to the kind of Statistics Canada in the census definition. So it could be rent subsidies, it can be social housing, and any sort of other housing support that they might receive. But the total number of households that we estimate receive subsidized housing in Canada is 67,000. Sorry. And then if we were to talk about the number of people in unsuitable housing, I can pull that up real quick for you. So one thing,
if it's easier, Mr. Chair, maybe I could just suggest that maybe that information could be tabled, just because I don't want you to have to search through the report. I have limited time, so would that be okay? Ms. Nicole? Yeah, Mr. Guiraud said yes, so I saw his thumbs up sign. Great.
Yeah.
So what I was going to ask is, in terms of the average cost to renovate or retrofit an unsuitable or inadequate unit of housing, do we have an estimate of how much that would cost?
We have an estimate of the cost of building a unit. So retrofitting or renovating, the cost would depend on the extent of damage or also the extent to which we want to retrofit to current standards or to go beyond that. So I don't think that's data that we have, but we have the cost to build from scratch on average.
Great. And then, so what is the cost to build an affordable housing unit without all the programmatic costs? I think it was in there at 297,000. Was that right?
It depends by jurisdiction, depends where you are in the country. There are some areas that are lower cost, obviously, and areas where the cost is much higher. So I think we have that as well. But I can tell you for sure that in the north, it's always a bit more expensive because of the short construction season and the cost to get materials up north.
So, and do you have an estimate of how many affordable housing units we would need to build to solve the Indigenous housing crisis that we have in this country?
We can probably derive that when we say that there's about 124,000 households that are in housing need, that's probably about what we need to build to solve the housing needs of the Indigenous population. And that, of course, would have to take into account the demographic increases of that fast-growing population.
And I know you've estimated this 636 million gap, but I noticed the way you defined that gap was that it was how much people paid compared to what was considered affordable. I'm not sure whether that actually addresses, so I'm just wondering whether I can draw from this the conclusion that if we added $636 million to support that, closing that gap, are you saying that would actually solve the crisis that we're in? Because I don't see how that makes sense to me. I think we need to build a lot more housing, right? So the supply is not there. That's part of the problem. So it's not a matter of just helping people afford to buy houses if there are none in existence, right?
So the $636 million would fill the affordability gap, but it would not fill the suitable shelter gap. So there would still be households who would be in inappropriate housing, too small, too decrepit for their needs, or too decrepit period, but at least they wouldn't pay exorbitant price, or they wouldn't pay more than they can afford using CMHC's definition of affordability.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Go ahead if you want to supplement that, and then we're going to wrap up. Mr. Siegel-Brown, go ahead.
So for households where there were repair issues or crowding, that's unsuitable and inadequate housing, we aren't measuring the gap between the affordable level and what they pay. We're assuming that they would have to rent another unit at market rent. So that reflects the rent subsidy that would be required for that household to be able to access a unit at market rent.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Turnbull. Mr. Giroux, and your and your supporting staff. We first of all want to thank you for your patience in terms of having to wait until we got through the votes to appear before us, for the work that you've done on your report, and for being with us here this evening. I have no doubt that the report will greatly help us as we're now concluding the study and about to issue drafting instructions. So thanks again for being with us, and thank you for the work that you've done in furtherance of the study that we've undertaken. We are now going to move to committee business. Mr. Giroux and company, you're welcome to stay, but you're free to leave. We don't have any further questions.
Mr. Chair, just one quick point before we proceed, if that's okay, sir.
Yeah.
Mr. Giroux kindly agreed that they would get back to me on some of those questions. I think it's timely information for our upcoming report. So I'm just wondering if they would be able to give us that information in the next couple of business days, if that's most appropriate.
Yeah, Mr. Giroux, as quickly as you can come up with the answers that you've undertaken to provide, because as I indicated, you are the last witnesses for the study. We're going to issue drafting instructions, and the information that you've committed to provide may very well factor significantly in the report. So I'm reluctant to impose a deadline, but if we could ask you to proceed with all due haste, that would be greatly appreciated.
Sure, we always strive to provide information as fast as possible, but we'll put extra attention to your committee. And I would say, Mr. Chair, that's what happens when you save the best for last.
You don't want to reopen the debate here. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Colleagues, we do have quite a few items by way of committee business, so I'll just give you a rundown of what we hope to accomplish, and then we'll start chipping away. The first order of business will be the election of a vice chair. Then I would like for us to turn our attention to our next study on employment insurance, and talk about the next meeting and the opening statements. Also on the EI study, if we could agree on whether we're going to accept briefs. There does appear to be a fair amount of interest, and we have drafted a press release if you wish to do that. The other items for consideration is, of course, issuing drafting instructions on the report that we're in the process of finishing now, and exactly how we're going to incorporate the testimony that we just heard today as part of those drafting instructions, because you will have received already a draft outline. So it's a discussion around how we're going to slot this in. We've got 2 budgets for you to approve, and perhaps a discussion around the way we structure panels for the next report, bearing in mind that we continue to have encroachments on our time from votes. So that's what I hope to get through in the next hour or less. So if we could start, and of course any other business that you wish to raise. So if we could start with the election of the vice chair, now that Vice Chair Peter Kent is moved on to greener pastures, there is an opening for the position of vice chair, which must be a member of Her Majesty's loyal opposition. The floor is now open for nominations for the position of vice chair.
So pursuant to Standing Order 1062, the first vice chair must be a member of the official opposition. I am now prepared to receive motions for the first vice chair.
My hand is raised, but I'm not being recognized by the chair, so I will.
Mr. Vest.
I will move. Thank you, Clerk. Mr. Chair, I move that Raquel Dancho become the vice chair of our committee.
It has been moved by Brad Viss that Raquel Dancho be elected first vice chair of the committee. Are there any further motions? I will now proceed to recorded division unless there's unanimous consent for the motion. Seeing that there is consent, I declare the motion carried, and I declare that Raquel Dancho is duly elected first vice chair of the committee. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Sorry for that radio silence there, Mr. Viss. I guess I overstepped my bounds. The second item of committee business, I'd just like to have a brief discussion, colleagues, about our upcoming study on employment insurance. We have commitments from some officials to come and provide us with a briefing on Thursday. Given that EI is vast and that the officials will be with us, I'm in your hands as to whether we stick with our normal 5 minutes of opening statement, or whether you would like something where they do more talking and we ask less questions in terms of getting background. So I want to test the waters here to see whether there is any appetite for requesting a longer than 5-minute presentation for them, or whether we stick with the routine motions that we've adopted for this meeting as we have for all others. Any thoughts on that? Seeing none, I am inclined to
My hand is raised, Mr. Chair.
And me too. My hand is raised as well.
Mr. Viss, et puis Madame Chabot.
And then Madame Chabot after Mr. Viss.
Okay, sorry, I didn't have the panel up. Okay, I'm with you now. I'll try to keep up. Mr. Viss, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just say that generally speaking, I think I'm not going to speak for my colleagues on the committee, but 5 minutes seems to be substantive. I think for the government officials that appear, if they'd like to cover more information and provide detail, they are welcome to provide further commentary in both official languages in advance that we can read and respond to in our questioning. Thank you.
Fair enough. Madame Chabot?
I think you're on mute. Your microphone is in the right position, but you're on mute. Oh, see, I found something wrong with you. You don't see the raised hands. You're right. Okay, so that threw me off, actually. Okay, because your question, well, could you give us how many people are going to come to speak to us? I imagine your question is related to the fact that, what, there'll be several people coming? Anyway, I would be in favor of maintaining the 5 minutes. And by my question, they could complement their comments. Madame Chabot, perhaps the clerk could respond. How many witnesses are we expecting for the first meeting? There are at least 4, perhaps 5 witnesses. But probably just one person is going to speak. Well, we ask if the committee would like more information in advance, that if they want to stay for more than 5 minutes. Normally it's 5 minutes. Thank you. I agree with 5 minutes.
Not to alter the rules, and to encourage them to provide a more comprehensive opening statement if they feel restricted by the 5 minutes. That's thank you, colleagues. Next, with respect to the next study, it would be customary for us to advise at the beginning of a study that for any that folks can submit written briefs. So I would like to hear from you on that. We normally would notify people that they can submit a brief and let them know of a deadline. Based on our current workload, I would estimate that we will probably finish hearing from witnesses on this study probably about mid-April. So if we set a deadline for briefs mid-April, subject to it being changed, if the circumstances change, that might be reasonable. So any thoughts with respect to the submission of briefs? I recognize Mr. Viss.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, earlier today, I met with the Canadian Federation of Students, and they had a lot to say on employment insurance, but I don't believe they're on our witness list. So I think it's in the interest of this committee to get a full appreciation of the complexity of this issue we're trying to address in 5 meetings would be to our collective benefit. Secondly, I might have to get some West Coast fishermen to challenge all those great benefits you have out in Prince Edward Island that I'm sure they would love to have out here on the West Coast as well. No, kidding on the second point.
So I take it you agree that we should have allow for written briefs. Anybody with any strong feeling around a mid-April deadline? Or any other comments with respect to briefs? I believe I see consensus on that point. Thank you. Okay, can we come back now to the study at hand? So a draft outline for the report on urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing has been circulated. Any comments, any advice, any further direction for the analysts, including what do we do with the testimony that we just heard in the last hour? How do we incorporate that? So the floor is open for advice to the analysts with respect to drafting. Mr. Viss, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry for hogging the mic today. I would just say under Section D, if there was some coverage of Mr. Chief Leon, who appeared before committee and spoke about the challenges that on-reserve Indigenous Canadians also face, at least be referenced or alluded to, would be most appreciated. In my riding, which is largely rural and many areas is remote, Indigenous people are still living on reserve, but still meet all those other criteria. And I think it's not the focus of our report, but plays heavily into what we discuss and how it relates to urban Indigenous issues as well, or Indigenous people living off reserve. Otherwise, I felt that the draft report outline generally was quite balanced and good. Thank you.
Mr. Viss, Madame Chabot, s'il vous plaît.
First, a comment for Mr. Viss. It's strategic. You raise your hand, but you don't lower your hand after, so the chair thinks it's still your first turn. Ha! We figured it out. I agree with the draft that was presented. There is one thing. I imagine this was intentional. When we talk about an overview of the off-reserve Indigenous situation, as our study focused on Indigenous housing in urban, rural, and northern areas, in our approach, we should be able to distinguish for each portion of the study that was part of what we mentioned. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the analysts for doing the work that they have done so far. It is very much appreciated. I'm just wondering, in Section D as well, D.1, that factors that contribute to housing shortage, if there can be something in there on limitations of current policies that can be a barrier. So, for example, administrative burdens or even bureaucracy. I know there is some testimony from from earlier, I guess late last year, talking about some of the administrative burdens and how even though it's current policy, it still is a burden, or some of the smaller organizations actually don't even apply because it costs money and takes manpower and that type of thing. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Vaughn.
I'm not going to speak to a specific section, but I think that from the perspective of trying to form policy based on the report, which is
Mr. Vaughn, just for the benefit of the interpreters, just drop your mic a bit.
Sorry.
There you go. Thanks.
I'm not going to speak to a specific section, but I think that in general, the principles we need are effectively how big is the housing need, and most in a most pronounced way, what are we spending? And it's hard to get it from the Parliamentary Budget Office, because even though we asked for the breakdown of provincial numbers, we didn't get it. But what are we spending into the provinces that might be better spent into Indigenous communities themselves, with more certainty that it's landing in Indigenous households? The goal here is not just to create the program, but also to consolidate existing programs so that we know exactly how we're dealing with Indigenous housing intentionally from a federal as a federal program, because it's clear we can't rely on the provinces to partner with us with any reliability or certainty. The second thing, in terms of the projection of what the housing needs are now, based on the demographics of the Indigenous communities outside the reserve system, which means modern treaties as well as the territories. The other information we're likely to need is the demographic growth projections to scale the report so that we don't solve yesterday's problem tomorrow with today's numbers. Instead, we deal with tomorrow's numbers as part of a solution for tomorrow. And then the final piece of it is to break down, based on somewhat what the Parliamentary Budget Office tried to do, but on what we need to build, what we need to repair, and what we need to subsidize in order to make it viable housing. Good housing systems typically are 50% subsidy, 25% construction, 25% maintenance, and that's typically where you try to land your dollars. But I have a feeling within the backlog of repairs here that we're going to need to have some sort of assessment of what the outstanding state of good repair is in existing housing. And then the final piece of it is to make sure that we understand how this intersects with the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Report, and how women's housing and housing for youth coming out of care in particular are probably the most vulnerable subpopulation of Indigenous housing needs, even though that covers everything but men in some ways. But the reality is that we need to kind of know the demographic split, because as we saw in the PBO report, larger families and larger households are typical of Indigenous composition. But at the same time, we also know the lack of safe space for individuals puts them in incredibly vulnerable situations. So a demographic breakdown of what's unique about the housing model, just so we can scale it appropriately. And then the final piece, which I think we need more information on in particular, is we don't know where the 53% of Indigenous people in subsidized housing are. We know that they're getting it. That's what the report tells us, but we don't know whether they're in provincial systems, private systems, Indigenous systems, or whether their subsidy is coming from a different form of pension like disability or what have you. If there was any way of helping us understand exactly what the subsidy needs to be, because the other thing that stood out to me in the report, and I didn't get a chance to ask them, was that they calculate core housing need at 25% for Indigenous people, whereas for most other Canadians, it's a 33% calculation. Why is there an 8% differential for Indigenous peoples, and what do we need to accommodate that in projecting program costs? So those are some very specific requests that are unanswered by the PBO and some of the testimony we heard. I hope it isn't too specific and long the list, but there it is.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Ms. Gazan, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of pieces of clarification. Section C, we have, Section D, Part 2, we have impacts on Indigenous youth, women, girls, 2S LGBTQIA people. Are those going to be separate because they're separate issues? I'm worried that they're going to be clumped together, and then the issues won't be delved into adequately. I know that Adam Vaughan just spoke about the inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. We know that rates of violence are increasing, particularly for women, upwards of 400% in some places. We know youth homelessness, certainly in my riding, I know many ridings, many kids, aging out of care into homelessness. Like, how is this going to be organized?
Okay, I'm not sure that I have an answer for you, Ms. Gazan, but I think these are live questions that we want to make sure that the analysts consider, and that's kind of our goal here, is to give them a bit of feedback to help them come up with a draft. As we see a draft, it may be that we'll have further suggestions.
Yeah, and I think looking at that, I think it's like Indigenous youth, women, girls, 2S LGBTQIA, but also intersectionalities within that. I think is really important. Okay, so the other question I had was just some clarification. I don't understand what we were talking about, developing a national Indigenous housing organization.
That was certainly testimony that we heard from more than a couple of witnesses that recommended that. So I would expect that would be something that would be reflected in the report. Whether we adopt it as a recommendation, that depends on the will of the committee. But certainly it was an idea that we heard from more than one witness.
Okay, I just because I know that the focus was primarily on developing a national urban, Indigenous, and rural housing strategy. We know, I mean, certainly even with the questions we had today, there's a lot of diversity around the country, even in terms of funding, how housing is funded, having this kind of, one size fits all across the country, I know has actually hurt Manitoba in terms of even rolling out a rapid housing strategy. So I do have some concerns about that, just because there's such diversity. A national housing strategy that reflects that diversity and massive jurisdictional differences, I think was more of the evidence I heard, rather than just kind of a one size fits all, because it's not fitting. So those are just a couple of points I had, but thank you and congratulations to Rachel Dancho for being elected the vice chair.
Hear, hear. Mr. Viss, please.
Maybe the analyst can just clarify a couple of points. I know there's lots of precedent on committee studies to refer to previous studies that were undertaken to provide context. Can the analyst confirm which reports on missing and murdered Indigenous women that they would be referring to? I think that does provide good context if it's been conducted by other committees that we can refer to in the report. That's my first question, if the analyst could just answer that.
Okay. Great. Elizabeth, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I can certainly answer that. We can certainly refer to outside reports and studies if that's something that the committee would wish us to do to provide further context for some of those sections.
Okay, thank you. And I raised that point because, and then to Ms. Gazan's points, all of the different groups that she mentioned and the intersectionality lens that she wants to apply, I just think that we need to stick to the actual people, the Indigenous people that we heard at this committee, and the points that they were raising first and foremost, because they were the ones that we brought forward to the committee. And I'm worried with some of those comments that we're going off the what the witnesses were saying and just trying to add additional points right now. And then thirdly, I'm just going to make a comment that there's been a few by Mr. Vaughan and Ms. Gazan talking about provincial governments. But I will say that I just had an Indigenous group in my riding rejected from the RHI because they said that the on-reserve housing was specific, and they were wondering to me, asking me why they were rejected already, when we all know that up in their neck of the woods that housing is woefully inadequate. So comments about whatever provincial government is in question about their inability to provide housing, I would raise the same points about the ability of the federal government lack of responsiveness that we heard from Indigenous Services Canada on basic questions that the PBO was able to provide, but they were reluctant to even respond to. Thank you.
Okay. Madame Chabot, s'il vous plaît.
Madame Chabot. Madame Chabot. Thank you. Yes, everything's in the right place this time. Well, as a member of a committee, this would be the first report. It's a substantial report to prepare because the issue is extremely relevant but very broad. But I thought I heard elements that we may wish to add to the report, which to my knowledge were never part of the study, or we didn't have any analysis of them, or we haven't heard any witnesses about them. To me, a report should be based on what our mandate is, identify the barriers, and the conclusions of the report will become very political in the sense that our committee, if we report to the House, if we have recommendations to make. But, you know, for me, the analysts have to be able to work with briefs and testimony that we heard. I don't see why we'd add, for example, the whole issue of the provinces and the money. The parliamentary budget officer just said that they don't have those analyses. Well, we're not going to ask us to have our analysts perform analyses that we don't already have from elsewhere. That's my concern. Otherwise, we'll end up in a situation where either it won't reflect what we've heard, and I'd like what we have heard to be what comes out of the report, because this is how we could identify from the programs what the things that should be improved are. Thank you, Madame Chabot. Mr. Long.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening to all my colleagues, and congratulations to MP Dancho on becoming Vice Chair. I'd like to suggest also, if we could, adding a bullet under Section E, subsection 1, that would be a human rights-based approach. I know that did come out in questions that I asked, and it certainly was brought forth during testimony. So I'd like to suggest that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Vaughan.
Yeah, you know, I really am quite flummoxed by the level of detail and the characterization of some of the information in the PBO. It's astounding in its absence of fact and reliance on anecdotal evidence, which I never expected an accountant to say that. But there is clear indication, and the answer that was given by the PBO was that because there is no requirement under provincial transfers to report back the effectiveness of the spending in an area where we have clear federal jurisdiction, it's told me that we are sending money, but we're not delivering results, and because of that, there is a double whammy. If you're not involved in the federal spending, there's no way of knowing if you're caught and saved by the provincial spending. And as a result, and I think that MP Gazan has identified this in Manitoba in particular, if both governments go in the wrong direction at the same time, Indigenous communities are left with absolutely nothing. And that's exactly why we're finding the numbers so astounding in Manitoba. So I think that's a finding. It doesn't really matter on the dollar amount. What matters is that federal transfers are not landing in the households of Indigenous families, and they're a federal responsibility. And so therefore, the question I asked directly to the PBO is, do we need to be intentional about it? And the response was yes. So that's the point that's driven from this is not who's doing a good job or a bad job or what's being spent where. It's how do we be intentional about this where there's an area of clear federal jurisdiction, and the Supreme Court has ruled on this. The second point I'd make, and I'd love to take it offline with Mr. Viss, but we are being briefed by CMHC officials. No one has been told yes or no in the project stream yet. What sounds like is somebody who is disqualified as not being eligible as opposed to not being qualified. And I'll happy to give you a call afterwards and see if there's a way of rectifying that through a different program. But I'm trying to find out too who the projects are, because I've got needs in my writing. But no rejection slips because no positive slips have gone out. We're still in the final days of making that determination.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughan. Ms. Gazan, you had an intervention?
Yes, just just to build on, Indigenous women, I do think it's critical to incorporate the calls to justice of the National Inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, much of it specific to housing, but also income. So just a suggestion there. And just in response to MP Viss, when we're talking about intersectionalities, that was very much a part of the testimony. For example, being Indigenous and transgender, for example. So I think it's really critical that we certainly look at the list of folks, and particularly in that area, there's a number of, for example, LGBTQIA youth who find themselves homeless. So why is that, and what's the need, and what kinds of supports? And I think we have to reflect that diversity in the report. And certainly we heard a lot of that testimony during the study, which I really appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Chabot.
Yes, a last comment. My concern is that this report, we've heard so many testimonies, and I want the report to reflect all the testimonies. It's as though we were trying... Madame Chabot, your microphone, could you lower your microphone? It's as though we're trying to put conclusions in advance into this report, and then we want to say, oh, it's all the province's fault. My purpose in this report is not to find the guilty parties. It's not to say, federal government, you're not giving enough money, and provinces, you're not doing your job. Now, it's possible that in our findings we can note that there may be weaknesses in certain areas, but we have to be able to look at the programs and the responsibilities that are shared, and we, above all, have to look at what the barriers have been so that we still have this gap and we still have these needs based on what we've heard from people. How can we present solutions? I'm not going to write the conclusions in advance.
Merci. Mr. Viss, please.
Well, I think Madame Chabot, I couldn't have explained it any better. I think we need to let the testimony of our witnesses stand before coming to any conclusions. I take that very seriously because, as you all know, I invited many Indigenous witnesses from my riding, and I will never presume to speak or understand what they're talking about from their experiences in life. So I would agree with Madame Chabot in the approach we need to take.
Thank you, Mr. Viss. And Ms. Gazan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry I'm taking up so much airtime. But I'm just thinking in terms of the study, I think MP Chabot certainly brings up a good point, but she also speaks to the diversity around the country. So, going back to looking at developing a national Indigenous housing organization, I also think we have different cultural traditions between our provinces in the country. I think that would be really difficult. I think a more certainly productive action would be, in fact, to look at diversity in provinces, see what the differences are, see what the similarities are, and develop and if we are looking at a national plan, you can't develop a national plan if you don't honor the diversity between provinces. It would be ineffective.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Gazan. Mr. Vaughan, I see your hand up. I don't know if that's because you left it up or if you have something else you want to say, but if you do, you have the floor. Now I see your hand has gone down. Okay. Very good. That exhausts the speakers list. I'm going to go back to the analyst for the last word. Any instruction, any comments, any clarification, any questions on the feedback? I think it was a good discussion, but whether that makes it any clearer in the direction that needs to be taken, I'll leave it to you for any comments you might have for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess one point of clarification, it's not quite clear to me at this point how the committee wishes us to integrate the PBO report. So perhaps if members could comment on this or provide feedback in some way, as in, does the committee wish it to be integrated throughout the document? Is it a separate chapter? Just some thoughts for your consideration. Thank you.
I recognize Mr. Vaughn.
I think where the PBO report details what witnesses told us, it's very helpful. I think where it veers off into conjecture or guessing or anecdotal evidence, I think it becomes less helpful because it's just that, it's anecdotal evidence, and that's not helpful when we're trying to build a real report with real ideas, real facts, and towards a real direction. I can't tell you how astounded I am at some of the language that was used to describe some of the conclusions. Like anecdotally, we talked to some housing providers who stopped work during COVID. I mean, I wouldn't get into that, but it's. I think that rather than have it stand as a sort of a monumental sort of environmental scan of the situation facing urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing, I just don't think it delivered that. What I do think it delivered, however, were some of the gaps, some of the areas where funding is allocated but not directed, and some of the areas where funding is extended but no guarantees are being made that it's being met. And I think we heard that from the witnesses in much more profound ways as it relates to region. So I would use it as a document to detail factually where it's factual the observations and analysis provided us to the people with lived experience, most of whom are Indigenous, who said we have a shortage of housing subsidies, and we can now know exactly what that shortage looks like. But I think that when it gets into the 25 versus 30%, and that's just a guess, that's where it's at, I'm not sure how good a report could be if you base it on guesses.
Mr. Viss?
I would love to have the PBO report back about whether they believe their testimony is in fact anecdotal and provide commentary that we could perhaps include within our report, because I wouldn't be as dismissive as Mr. Vaughn. But maybe one area where we do come in common is that what we've heard from officials and what we've heard from the Indigenous testimony is that the federal government falls very short on where we need to be as it relates to housing. And a big part of that is, in fact, the gaps in data collection and how money is being spent. And I think that has become very, very clear, both within the PBO report and within the testimony we heard. So maybe I think it would be best if we referred, and we can get into that debate and leave that judgment to the analyst as well about where it's relevant in the course of what the testimony said and how the PBO report complements that. But secondly, I think it should be included perhaps as an appendix to the report, or at least referenced extensively so people know that this was a big chunk of how we are trying to understand where money is going, how it's being spent, and who it's serving.
Thank you. Mr. Turnbull?
Yeah, I can't speak for Mr. Vaughn, but certainly my impression of the PBO report was that it was written by accountants and financial analysts. And when you have those folks, no offense to them, but when they write a report, they often use financial modeling. And in financial modeling, you've got to make a whole bunch of assumptions. I think I agree with my colleague, Mr. Vaughn, which is that some of those assumptions may turn out to be false. And I think we should take our direction from people with lived experience, the witnesses that we heard from, because the one thing that the PBO's report does not do is assess the level of effectiveness of any one of the interventions. They haven't broken it down in a way that I think is digestible and makes sense given the testimony we've heard. And I think we have to take their conclusions with a large degree of caution. And I think if we should be asking, furthermore, I think we should be asking for them to clearly identify any of the assumptions that they've made in their report, so that we can, take those, basically include a caveat in any of our final reports that says, that these are assumptions or financial models that are based on assumptions. Mr. Viss, I could see you shaking your head, but I actually know what I'm talking about here. So I think that there are assumptions that are a part and parcel of doing any kind of modeling and projections like this, and I think we just have to take those. We have to be careful about how we use those. Thanks.
Madame Chabot.
A last intervention on the report analysis from the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Now, we asked questions, based on what they were working from, what kind of data. Well, it was a 2016 census. Well, maybe all of the analyses are not apropos or sensitive for our report's purposes, but from that to call them anecdotal and say it's not serious, I have a problem with that. The director has provided this information at our request, and he's independent, and he's there to enlighten us as parliamentarians. That's it. I think that our analysts who are doing a terrific job and who prepare us for questions when we're in committee, I think they have been able to cull from the last document for our witnesses of today questions that were related to the testimonies which we've received. Perhaps these are elements of the report that should be related to the elements that struck us in the testimonies. Thank you. Mr. Dong?
Thank you, Chair. As I was listening the question and answer today, one I thought was very interesting was that the fact when Mr. Vaughan asked the officials about whether or not how much control we have when the money flows to the province and how much that money gets spent on what was originally intended. I thought the answer was very interesting, and also the fact that they can't get relevant information from the provincial government. I think that's very telling. I remember Mr. Vaughan made a comment that perhaps either we. I don't want to speak for him, but so he's free to correct me if I'm wrong. But I remember he said something like perhaps we should prescribe more on put more leash on the funding prescribed, because this is interesting because we heard many times from a few premiers calling for a leash-free infrastructure funding or all kinds of funding, and I think this is the study can perhaps shed some light and provide some recommendation to the government in that respect. So I just want to kind of highlight this part. I thought that was a very interesting finding from today's testimony. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dong. Mr. Viss?
I'm just going to reiterate my point. While the Liberal members seem to be focused on what the provincial governments are doing, we are federal MPs, and what's very clear from what we're seeing is that we don't even have enough information on what our own level of government is doing. That is where we have responsibility. We can say to the provinces all day long, well, you need to do a better job. We can't do our job because we don't know what you're doing. The fact is, irrespective of a conservative or liberal government, there's a lot of house cleaning that needs to be done on behalf of Indigenous Canadians to ensure that our taxpayer dollars are being used effectively for the well-being of all Canadians, and that the 0.8 and the 0.7%, $500 million or so referenced over 10 years in the PBO report is not sufficient. I think all of us will agree on that. But starting to go down this pathway where we look at gaps in the report because of what the PBO was able to, because of the data that PBO was given by our federal public service, and that data not being sufficient enough per Mr. Turnbull's points, goes back to the primary point, is that we don't know what the government is doing on behalf of people, and we want to put a report together that's going to make a measurable difference in the lives of Canadians, Indigenous Canadians living in rural and remote areas especially.
Ms. Gazan?
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Viss. As the only Indigenous person on this committee, I'm going to use that card, and I'm going to tell you it is not working. You know, we have a lot of diversity as an Indigenous people around the country, including jurisdictional diversity, on, off reserve in terms of how things are funded. We also have cultural diversity around the country. So what works for the Mi'kmaq out east probably won't work for you know, Indigenous nations in the prairies. We have that cultural diversity. Absolutely, I think that there is differences between regions. I am very concerned that we're not looking at whether money for housing is actually reaching people. This has been disastrous in Manitoba with the provincial government. We need to find ways to make sure whatever government is in place, that the federal government, if they are giving housing dollars, that it actually makes it to people. And I'll give you an example, and I'll leave it at this. Our community just built a teepee village. It's like minus 51 here, because our money for housing, totally inadequate, is not getting to people. So now we're putting up teepee villages right in my riding down the street from where I live. So this is critical. This is about not getting into, this is our responsibility. This is looking at how jurisdictions can work together or not work together to make sure people don't die on the streets. I've had a couple of deaths in the last couple of weeks because we get into these banters. I just need money to get to people so they don't die. That's where it's at. It is not working. So I just want to put in that, and I feel it's very rare that I've been this upfront in committee, but I can tell you that conversation is a critical part of the discussion to save lives.
Vaughn?
I'm going to leave it there. I don't care which level of government has failed both
Mr. Dong?
Yeah, so Adam, you gotta lower your mic. I didn't hear what he had to say, but
As I said, I'm just going to leave it there. Both orders of government have tragically failed urban, rural, and northern housing needs for Indigenous people, and Leah's final comment is enough for me. Let's write the report and get it done.
yeah, I was gonna say the same thing to MP Gazan. What you said, you know, it's I think we're on the same page. I'm not. I don't think that there's a partisanship being played here. If the recommendation comes out that, you know, we have to put more restrictions, more conditions, or more time to make sure that money flows to who need them and get these things done, let's do it, right? So that let it be in our recommendation. So I'm what I was talking about. I don't want to be misunderstood. Is not to kind of defend the government or put the blame on other government. No, that's not it. It's just going forward to, as a function of this committee, to give recommendations to the government. This is what you should do. And if it's to, you know, to say that, you know, give a timeline that you have to deliver this money or get this build, and everybody agreed to it. Once the money starts to flow, let's build them. So that was my point. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you, Mr. Dong. Colleagues, I did have a few other things that I was hoping to get through, and I don't know whether we've provided clarity for the analyst or gone a little bit off the rails. But the fact is that there is another committee looking to get into this room fairly shortly. If it is the will of the committee, I would entertain a motion now for adjournment. We do have some time for committee business at the end of Thursday's meeting after we have our briefing from ESDC. Do we have consensus?
I would agree. If there's a vote coming up soon. Exactly.
consensus? Is it the will of the meeting to adjourn? I read consensus. Thank you very much. I hope that this has provided some direction for the analysts, and I anticipate that we're going to have a spirited discussion once we get a draft just the same. So we're adjourned. Thank you, colleagues. We'll see you Thursday.